It's a symbol of faith, of hope, and salvation to billions of people. But before it was any of that, it was something else entirely. It was a weapon, an instrument of terror, designed for maximum pain and public humiliation. So, let's get into it. Let's dive into the brutal reality of crucifixion.
You know, you see it everywhere, right? But to really get a handle on how it became what it is today, we have to go back. We have to understand what it was meant to be. And here's a key thing. The Romans, they perfected crucifixion, for sure, but they didn't invent it. Oh no. Its story is way older and a whole lot darker. You have to understand, for a Roman citizen, crucifixion wasn't just, another way to die. No way. This was the ultimate punishment. It was saved for the lowest of the low, slaves, certain criminals, and, this is crucial, enemies of the state. It was all about making a point, a really clear, really public, and really terrifying point.
Okay, so to really get the Roman version, we gotta rewind. Because this whole idea of suspending someone in public to kill them, it didn't just pop up overnight. It evolved for centuries.
So, take a look at this. This timeline shows something really important. The cross wasn't some sudden Roman idea, not at all. It was the brutal endpoint of a long, slow evolution in public punishment. I mean, you can see it starting way back in the 9th century BCE with the Assyrians impaling people on stakes. Then the Persians picked it up, the Greeks had their own version, each one adding their own little, cruel twist. By the time the Romans got it from the Carthaginians, it was already a pretty well-oiled machine of terror. The Romans, they just perfected it. They turned it into this industrial-scale tool for controlling their empire. And it lasted all the way until Emperor Constantine finally put a stop to it in 337 CE.
And check this out. This is basically an early ancestor of the cross, and it's hidden right in Greek mythology. This is Andromeda, yeah, but the way she's being punished? Attached to a horizontal bar that's called a patibulum, and just left to die? That was a real thing. It was called exposure, and you can see the connection right away, can't you? The public display, the total helplessness, the slow, agonizing death, this is the blueprint, the foundation the Romans built on.
All right, let's bust a major myth right now. It's one you've probably seen 100 times in paintings, in movies, this image of a guy hauling a huge, complete cross through the streets on his way to be executed.
Well, the reality was a little different and a lot more practical. As historian John Granger Cook explains, the person being crucified never carried the whole cross. They only carried the horizontal piece, the patibulum. Think about it. The full cross, the crux, would have just been way too heavy.
So what does that mean? It means the execution sites, which were usually outside the city walls, were basically these fields of permanent vertical beams, just sticking out of the ground, waiting. The condemned person had to carry the tool of their own torture, that crossbeam, to the site, but not the whole impossibly heavy thing.
Okay, now we're going to get into the mechanics of it all, how this thing actually worked. And just a heads up, this part gets pretty graphic, but it's really important if you want to understand the true reality of the cross.
We can actually piece together the procedure from old Roman laws. First step, a vicious flogging. Then came that procession we talked about, carrying the patibulum. At the site, the victim was attached to that beam, nailed or tied, while it was still on the ground. And then the whole thing, the person and the beam, was hoisted up and slammed onto that permanent vertical post. And if they really wanted to make a show of it, they'd sometimes add in extra tortures with fire, just to ramp up the agony in the spectacle.
And this isn't just some historical theory, okay? Look at this. On the left, that is a real human heel bone. It belonged to a man named Jehohanan, found near Jerusalem. And that is the Roman nail that killed him, still stuck in his bone 2,000 years later. This is the only direct archaeological proof of crucifixion we've ever found. And the image on the right shows how they think his feet were nailed, pinned sideways to the post. I mean, wow! This one object just makes it all so chillingly, undeniably real.
So you'd probably think that death came from the nails, right? From blood loss, but nope, in most cases, that wasn't it. The real killer was something much slower and way, way more torturous. It was asphyxiation, suffocation.
Here's the physiology of it, and it is just awful. When you're hanging by your arms like that, your own body weight pulls down and stretches your chest muscles wide open. This makes it incredibly difficult to breathe out, to exhale. So to get a single breath out, the person had to push their entire body weight up on their nailed feet. Just imagine that. It created this agonizing cycle. Push up through blinding pain just to breathe, then slump back down in exhaustion, and the whole process starts again.
This could go on for hours, sometimes even days, until you just couldn't push anymore.
And the horror of this process is literally baked into our language, the word excruciating. It comes directly from the Latin ex cruce, which means out of the cross. Yeah, this punishment was so famously awful, it became the very word we use for the worst kind of pain imaginable.
So you gotta ask, why? Why go through all this trouble? Why such a complicated, slow, agonizing execution? Well, it's because crucifixion was never just about killing a person. It was about sending a message.
6,000. Just think about that number for a second. 6,000.
That's how many surviving rebels from Spartacus's army were crucified after his revolt was crushed. Their crosses lined the Appian Way, the main road from Rome to Capua, for miles and miles. It was like a terrifying, rotting billboard advertising what happens when you mess with Rome. And that horrifying display, it wasn't just about revenge. This was the whole point. The scholar Bart Ehrman puts it perfectly. Crucifixion was symbolic. It was political theater. It was a big, public statement that screamed, "We are Roman power and you are nothing." It was designed to show anyone even thinking about challenging Rome just how completely powerless they were. And the humiliation was just absolute. People were stripped naked and executed in the most public places they could find. They were totally helpless. They couldn't even shoo away birds or dogs. And maybe the worst part, especially in the ancient world, was being denied a proper burial. That was a huge deal. Their bodies were usually just left to rot on the cross as one last insult and one final warning to everyone else.
So, after hearing all that, you have to wonder, was this it? Was crucifixion the single worst way to die that humans ever came up with? Well, the answer is kind of complicated.
Yeah, let's put it in perspective. Were there other, maybe even more painful tortures? Possibly. You hear stories about things like the brazen bull, right? Stuff designed for just maximum agony. But here's the key difference. Those things were incredibly rare, almost legendary. Some of them might not have even been real. Crucifixion, on the other hand, had a totally different goal. It wasn't just about pain. It was about public terror. And its frequency? It was shockingly common. This was a systematic instrument of state power, used on thousands and thousands of people.
And that's really the main takeaway here. The true horror of crucifixion wasn't just the physical pain. It was the scale and the purpose behind it. This was the industrial strength, mass-produced terror of the ancient world's biggest superpower.
Which brings us right back to where we started, to the symbol we see everywhere today. How on earth did this, an instrument of the state's most brutal, humiliating power, completely flip to become a symbol of divine love and hope for billions of people? That journey from a tool of absolute terror to a sign of faith, it's one of the most incredible turnarounds in all of human history. And really understanding the true horror of what the cross once was, well, it makes that transformation even more extraordinary.